Days after the ceremony, Amara found herself wandering into the chemistry lab again. The room smelled faintly of ethanol and memories. His side of the table was empty, no scattered notes, no pencil marks. She traced the surface where he once sat and whispered, "You were always part of my success." Mrs. Obidike entered quietly. "You miss him?" Amara nodded. "Sometimes, my dear," the teacher said, "winning feels lonely until you realize the people who helped you get there are your true reward." Those words stayed with her all day. Weeks passed. Amara started preparing for university life at Unilag. Yet, every evening, she stared at her phone, wondering if Tobi would ever call. One night, she finally dialed his number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Her heart sank. But just as she set her phone down, it rang. Tobi's name. She froze before answering. "Hey," his voice came softly. "I thought you disappeared," she whispered. "I needed space. But I couldn't stay away forever." It wasn't a full reunion yet, but it was a spark of hope. They agreed to meet at the chemistry lab. When Amara walked in, it felt like time rewound. The same tables, the same light, the same quiet energy. Tobi smiled. "Remember our first experiment?" "How could I forget? You almost burned my sleeve." He laughed softly. "You screamed louder than the Bunsen flame." They laughed until the tension melted away. For the first time in months, they felt like them again, the team that once made the impossible look easy. Tobi had good news. He'd received a local scholarship for underprivileged students, covering his university fees. "I didn't win the big one," he said, "but I still get to chase my dream." Amara beamed. "Then we both made it, in our own ways." They promised to stay connected, no matter where life led them. As the sun set outside the lab, they shared a long, warm hug, not of romance, but of understanding and peace. At Unilag, Amara's world expanded: lectures, study groups, freedom. But even in her busy schedule, she kept in touch with Tobi through late-night calls and shared assignments. He'd tease her about how serious she'd become. "You're still my mad scientist," he'd say. "And you're still my lab disaster," she'd reply, laughing. Distance didn't weaken their bond, it deepened it. Sometimes love doesn't need presence, just persistence. At university, a senior named David started showing interest in Amara. He was confident, polished, and from a wealthy home. He invited her to group outings, offered rides, even gifted her a wristwatch. Amara appreciated the attention, but her heart never fluttered like it did with Tobi. One night, she stared at Tobi's old bookmark in her textbook and whispered, "No one fits like you." One day, Tobi saw a picture online, Amara smiling beside David at a campus event. He didn't read the caption, didn't ask questions. He just went silent. Amara noticed the change instantly. "Why are you distant again?" she texted. "No reason. Just busy." But the space between them widened, heavy with things unsaid. Months went by. Both pretended they'd moved on, but neither had. Tobi poured himself into his research at a small Lagos polytechnic. Amara buried herself in her university work. Sometimes she'd type a long message, and then delete it. Sometimes he'd replay her voice note, and then delete it too. They were still in love, but pride is the hardest equation to balance. Fate intervened when their universities selected top students to represent at the National Science Conference. When Amara walked into the hall, she froze. Standing on stage, preparing his slides, was Tobi. Their eyes met across the room. Everything came rushing back: laughter, heartbreak, the chemistry of love. Both gave brilliant presentations. But when Tobi's experiment faced a glitch, Amara instinctively stood up to help. The crowd watched in silence as they worked side by side, just like old times. Within minutes, the experiment was saved. The hall erupted in applause. A professor whispered, "Their chemistry is unmatched in science and in spirit." After the conference, they walked together along the marina waterfront. "You still remember my formulas," he said softly. "You still remember how to ruin them," she teased. He laughed, but then grew quiet. "I missed you, Amara." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Then why did you let me go?" "I thought I was holding you back." She smiled sadly. "You were the only thing holding me together." That night, the wind carried more than sea air, it carried healing. Weeks after the conference, Tobi visited her at Unilag. They walked around the campus gardens, reminiscing. When they reached the chemistry building, he stopped. "This place reminds me of us." "Everything reminds me of us," she replied quietly. He looked at her, eyes soft. "Can I?" She didn't let him finish. She leaned in and kissed him, soft, warm, and overdue. It wasn't fireworks. It was peace. The kind that only true love brings. Now together again, they promised to keep growing individually, not losing themselves in love. Tobi focused on his engineering innovations, while Amara started mentoring young girls in science. They still had disagreements, but now, they solved them, not fought them. Partnership, she'd remind him. Even in love, it's a team effort. And he'd smile. "My favorite team." Success brought new challenges. Tobi's small lab project got funding from a local company, but he was accused by another student of plagiarism. Amara stood by him through it all, gathering evidence, meeting professors. When the truth came out and Tobi was cleared, he looked at her and said, "You fought for me." She smiled. "We fight for each other, that's love." Years later, both had graduated. Amara became a lecturer's assistant at Unilag. Tobi started his own chemical startup for renewable energy. On the anniversary of their first experiment, he took her back to St. Mary's chemistry lab, now old and dusty. He knelt beside the same table where it all began. "Amara Okafor," he said softly, "we've mixed every element of life, friendship, struggle, faith, love. Let's make it permanent." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Yes." Their wedding was small but magical, a blend of African colors, laughter, and science-themed decorations. Kemi was made of honor. Femi cracked jokes. Even Mrs. Obidike attended, wiping tears proudly. As they exchanged vows, Tobi said, "From competition to completion, you've always been my missing formula." The hall erupted in applause and joy. Marriage wasn't perfect, but it was real. They had disagreements over work, late nights, and dreams, but every challenge only drew them closer. Tobi would often say, "Love is like chemistry, you test, you fail, you adjust, and you try again." And Amara would smile. "As long as you're my lab partner, I'll keep trying." Together, they founded the St. Mary's Science Foundation, giving scholarships to brilliant but struggling students across Nigeria. Each year, they returned to their old school to mentor students, reminding them that chemistry isn't just in labs, but in hearts that believe in each other. Their story became an inspiration, a tale told in classrooms, and later, across YouTube channels like yours. 10 years later, St. Mary's held a reunion. The chemistry lab had been renovated, but their initials, A+T, still faintly marked the corner of their old table. Tobi touched it and smiled. "We started here." Amara nodded. "And we never really ended." Students walked by, whispering, "That's the couple who met in this lab." They laughed, holding hands, proud of their journey. That night, as they stood under the stars, Amara whispered, "Do you think true love exists, Tobi?" He smiled. "Of course. We are living proof." She laughed softly. "You and your experiments." He took her hand. "Then let's call this one the forever reaction."
The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying laughter, love, and legacy of two hearts that lean in a humble chemistry lab in Lagos. That's the greatest formula of all is love. Subscribe for more African folktale and keep the story alive.